essentially there's no more, mass illegal immigration coming into the US. There is still mass legal immigration, and that's our problem here, and that's our primary issue.
I am concerned always about free speech being tampered. The second that you don't have free speech, you force people into underground conversations and backdoor conversations instead of out in the open where they can be lambasted for their ideas.
If that means a complete pause for 5 years to do that, if it's reducing the numbers, let's have that debate. I think it should be a complete pause for an extended period of time. And at the moment, we're not reflecting Christ's glory at all in our public policy.
So if you were to pick people out of a hat, you're more likely going to actually pick up someone who is Christian in identity and practice from a non-Anglo nation than you are to pick them from an Anglo nation. Like, pick a Filipino out of a hat, like 99% chance that they are Catholic. Mate, good to have you on. Welcome. This is the Mark Pirotta Show, new and improved with all of the new background. I reached out to you probably about 6 weeks ago now, I'd say, and just said, keep up the good fight, basically. And then you reached out to me literally 3 days ago and said, let's catch up. So here we are.
Yeah, 100%. Thanks for having me on, Mark. I appreciate it.
Anytime. But I don't want to make this like an interview style because we've never met before. So we haven't actually spoken in any way, shape or form. We've just seen each other's clips online.
Yeah.
So let's just do a chat about the world. And I think a good place to start right now, and I'm sure that you've actually been paying attention to this as well, is the revolution over in Iran. Have you been seeing the clips out of that?
I've been seeing a few of the clips. I know it's not getting any mainstream media coverage, which is sort of unsurprising. But you're probably better informed than me.
So basically what's happened is, and it's exactly what effectively Trump had called for back in, when he bombed the place. He said, either we will come in or the people are going to rise up and they're going to kick out these extremists. And they've started. It's been crazy. There's revolts through the streets. Women are taking off the hijab in protest, and it's now hit 50 different states.
Yeah, wow.
All in Iran, and it's one of those things that you look at and you say, is that going to come here? And are we going to have to do the same thing where we just have to take to the streets and actually revolt?
Yeah, no, that's understandable. I mean, I know that. It's been a long time coming in Iran. I suppose there's been so much volatility over there for a very long time, and I think. The actions earlier this year of Israel and the US can be debated, but I think it's objectively a good thing that the people themselves in Iran are rising up against what is a brutal dictatorship over there. So that's a good thing. I don't know how much Western resources should be involved. I tend to think it shouldn't at all. But obviously
agreed.
There's an argument for, well, if it wasn't for the involvement in the first place, would this have happened? I don't think it's really anything we need to concern ourselves with. So long as Australia isn't taking Iranian refugees, I'm happy.
100%.
But it is good for the Iranians.
Mate, it's funny because Iran's a bit weird because Iran used to be a very, very Christian nation, very Christian. And then in like the 60s and 70s when Khomeini came in and sort of revolutionized the IRGC and implemented this Islamic ideology through Iran. And the reason that I brought it up more than anything is that I see parallels with the way things started there, slowly allowing, I guess, parity between Muslims and Christians. And then once the Muslims gained power, they became tyrannical to an extent that was untenable for the rest of the population. And so that's mostly the reason that I think that we need to learn a lesson, because if we don't start putting the foot down now in Australia, I feel like that's going to be us in 100 years. That's the way that we're going to have to go.
100%.
I'm not sure.
You've seen it in England, like across the UK as well, how they've sort of spoken about, this whole replacement theory. It's just a right-wing conspiracy theory, all this sort of stuff. They're only 2% of the population. They're only like 20% of the population in London. And then it gets to the point where, it's looking like, the native population is going to be a minority now. It's like, who really cares anyway? So you're just being gaslit this entire time.
Yeah.
and told that it's not really happening. And then when it happens, which is their objective, they're sort of like, yeah, who cares? This is sort of what we wanted all along. You don't really get a say.
And
Which you're
what
right.
I
So they're the
think,
parallels.
yeah, and what I think is interesting as well is people always bring up they're only 20%, only 30% in certain areas, etc. And I forgot what her name is. She's the lady that she comes on and she says, "Welcome back to Batshit Bonkers Britain."
Yeah, right.
And I forgot what her name is, but she's this mad right winger. She actually came to Australia during the COVID era and then got deported out of Australia because she said something bad about the Australian government.
Right. I think I know the one you're referring to. The name evades me too.
Skinny, blonde, and she's always going on, my darlings, my sweets, and all this sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And she basically said, sure, it might be 10, 15% of the population, but they congregate in city centres, one. The other thing that people don't think about is Anthony Albanese is currently in power with 34% of the primary vote. And so you don't need a 50% majority to gain power in Australian politics. If anything, it's actually worse if you end up getting that majority because the majority of people did not vote for it. It's where the electoral seats are centered, and then you could have a 100-kilometer radius and you'll have one seat. Or you could have a 100-kilometer radius and you could have 100 seats in a 100-kilometer radius. And so that's one of the things that we're missing in Australia from the political sphere of the general populace understanding of how Australian politics works. And I said this. When did I say that? I said this recently. It's an education battle more than a political battle. We need to find a way to teach the population, the average person, how it works so that they can go forwards and actually put their foot down on the policies that they want to see put forward.
It's very true. I mean, you look at a place like Watson, so the federal electorate of Watson, which is Tony Burke's electorate, that's already at 30% Muslim. So you're talking about the primary vote being low, and it'll probably be, I don't think, a whole lot higher at the next election. Like, I don't think the Labor Party is a particularly popular one at the moment, but it's just that the opposition is absolutely pathetic. So that's sort of the dichotomy you got at the moment, and then obviously One Nation trying to cut through. So you've already got that influence, and they literally had at the last election last year a Muslim votes, like a Muslim voting bloc, which is what we've seen in the UK. You've seen them take over the city councils over there. So it's not like this is some far off thing. It's happening now in several different electorates across the country, and it'll just continue to happen if we don't say anything. So you're right, it is an education thing. But I think most Australians looking on now, particularly since Bondi, they sort of look around and think, yeah, we are sort of being replaced in our own country. This isn't really feeling like the place it used to. I don't necessarily feel safe. So I think most people know what's wrong, but perhaps they just can't put a finger on it. But I think a lot of it does come back to the issue of immigration, which is the biggest political issue at the moment in our country.
Yeah, 100%. That, and I would also say the general ingrained anxiety that the average Christian person has about speaking about their faith in public as well. We've been effectively told for our entire lives to keep our religion to ourselves, but it's only been us as Christians who have been told you've got to keep it to yourself. It's not polite to speak about your religion in public or to impose your religion in public upon the general populace, and you have to have separation of church and state, which I agree with. When there's a religious population, that works. But now we're entering a phase where, because there is no moral standard that exists, you can't differentiate between what is good and what is bad as a general rule. And we're going to get stuck there. We're going to get really unstuck as a population if we allow ourselves to not have an actual framework that the average person can look to. Because no one's looking through the laws. I mean, I don't know if you've ever looked through the actual law book of Australia. It's an impossible read. It's boring as all hell. It's like, at least the Bible is interesting. It's got awesome stories in it. It's a long book, but it's interesting. What we see with the legal framework is that you wouldn't even know what law you've broken if a police officer pulled you over. We know like 3 laws here. It's DUI, don't kill people, and don't own a gun. They're like the 3 laws that are pretty much standard in Australia today.
Yeah, and I mean, you're right, though. The moral fabric of our country has changed as Christians have got quiet, and obviously been diminished in the population. But that's happened because of this sort of really weak, pathetic version of Christianity that is not at all a reflection of Christ and his um, zeal for the teachings of the Father, for his own life that we're called to follow. I mean, you think about the Great Commission: go and make disciples of all nations. We aren't even making disciples of our streets. We aren't even talking to in our communities. Like we're afraid to speak about our faith in our workplace. And Australia is a Christian country. Christianity is the bedrock of our nation. Long before we were federated, pretty much 125 years and 2 days ago when we're filming this. Long before that, but even in 1901, the preamble of our constitution that stands to this day is humbly relying on the blessing of Almighty God. And that's not Allah. It's not the 300 million Hindu gods. It is Christ. It is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. So people who say the separation of church and state are often sort of move into, that's, Australia is a secular country for that reason. But Australia is not in any way a secular country. Our laws are very much based on Christianity, and our faith as a country. When we were brought into existence in 1901 as a federation, we were 96% Christian. So that's the population. It's now down to about 40%. So this is sort of why the demographics are important in terms of ethnicity. What does it actually mean to be an Australian? But 100% at the core, the fundamental moral framework for our country is Christ. It is Christianity, and we don't get to sit out anymore as Christians. You don't get to do that. I don't know who thought that they could give us permission to do that in the first place, but it is our responsibility to make disciples of all nations, and we should certainly start with our own.
Yeah, I 100% agree, and I've thought about that. And I'm actually not sure what denomination you are. I'm Roman Catholic.
Reformed Baptist.
Reformed Baptist. Yeah. I actually don't know too much about it, so you'll have to explain it.
So basically, Reformed Baptist, Reformed theology came about following the Protestant movement, of course, and we sort of hold to the London Baptist Confession of Faith of 1689. So that's sort of our equivalent of the catechisms, holding to sola scriptura, sola fide, all of the different the 5 different solas, which is a Reformed theology. It's covenantal, very much the way that we read and interpret the Bible is by covenants, so explaining the Old Testament through the lens of what it was pointing to in the New Testament. Been in Reformed Baptist Church now for just over 6 months, so I've still got plenty to learn myself. Came to Christ at the start of last year.
Wow.
More broadly. So, sort of like a cultural Christian upbringing, really good family, 4 older sisters, great mum and father, but really separate to Christ. We'd say grace before dinner, all that sort of stuff, but nothing practical. We wouldn't go to church and stuff like that. But it's incredible what's happened in the last couple of years. I mean, obviously myself, my incredible fiance, I'm getting married to in just under 3 months now, which is very, very
That's
exciting.
Awesome. Congrats, mate.
Yeah. Thanks, Rose. It's exciting. And she played a huge role in that, of course, for me. Just seeing my family then come to Christ as well. When you're unafraid to preach the truth and the gospel that we are so fortunate to have. It's not, by any works of our own that we get to hear the news. That's what we're called to go on with. It's a very, very exciting time.
Yeah, marriage. I'll say that marriage is a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So it's the best thing that's ever happened to me.
So when were you married?
I got married almost 7 years ago.
Yeah, right.
Now, so got married very, very young, and I was 21. I would turn 22 a month later. We've got 3 kids now, so 2 girls and a boy, and it is the most work, the most difficult, but also the most fun that you have in everything. Everything else seems dull compared to marriage and the fruits of marriage.
Yeah.
There is, it's one of those things that you feel bad for those who have been lied to their entire lives and told that it's a shackle, and it's, it is hard. Don't get us that it is difficult to get it right, but once you do, it is an incredible process. And it's one of the fundamental bedrock institutions that has been allowed to and incentivized to collapse in our society. And I'm really happy, mate, for you that you're getting married, and I wish you all the best in that venture, because it's a lot of work. It's a lot of fun, but it's a lot of work. So put in.
I will. Thank you, mate. I mean, you're so right, though, about how it has been, how it is the bedrock of basically it's the bedrock institution of how our society functions is the marriage, and the family comes from that, and how it's been chipped away at. And a lot of people point to gay marriage in 2017. It's not a thing. Yes, that further eroded it. But you go back to the 70s and the Whitlam government, and the Liberals supported it at the time as well, no-fault divorce. That's not marriage. That's just not marriage. This idea of, being able to call it quits, nothing ever happens, and then you just go on marrying other people. It's not Christ's call for what marriage is. And you read Ephesians chapter 5 and talking about how, it's symbolic of Christ and the church, and you're supposed to lead in that way. It is a high calling. And we've been going through our premarital with our pastor, and it's certainly, it's asking a lot. It asks a lot of the woman. I mean, obviously people like to say, it says submit to your husband. That's such a dirty thing, blah, blah, blah. They sort of fail to mention the calling for the husband as well, to lay down his life as Christ did for the church. So exactly, it asks right. A lot of both parties. So I can certainly see why, if not by, more nefarious actions, but why those in society have sought to chip away at it, because it just asks a lot, and I don't think people are willing to give a lot.
And going back to the point about the 70s and the 60s and 70s, I guess, is that entire movement that was created in order to ensure a free and fair workplace for women inside of the world. It was a movement that was across the entire Western world, right? That movement in and of itself, just on paper, with a lot of these things, it sounds incredible. It sounds like we're getting, equality for the masses, etc. But what it does in practice every single time that when you try and implement equality is that you remove the uniqueness of people. And with the way that it was then taken and corrupted, it's now no longer an if you want, it's a you must do. And that's what's caused so much strife in our society, specifically in and around the family, is when women are told that your highest value in society is to go and get a job, get a career, and live your life happily until your 40s. And men as well, to an extent, right? We're told in today's society that is or had been told that is your ultimate goal, instead of being a great father and a great husband. That's where you start to get the collapse of marriage, in my mind. And then all the other policies that fell out of that, like you said, gay marriage, to me, it's just a piece of paper at the end of the. I mean, I voted no at the time. It was one of the first votes that I ever did when I turned 18, or after I turned 18. And I remember fighting against it heartedly with a lot of my friends at the time, but mostly because I argued it from a definitional perspective. I hated that the definition of the term marriage was being diluted so much. And so you are definitely right in that it's not, that wasn't the thing that put it in the coffin. But to an extent, it was the obvious outgrowth of everything else that has happened for the last 50 years.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I mean, you look back to the sexual revolution in the 60s. Like you said, this idea of there not being distinct roles for men and women. And men and women are great at different things, and that's by God's design. It's for a reason, and it's a good thing. And I think when you chip away at that, and, you basically end up with a situation where, the bedrock of our society, which is marriage, isn't valued. Instead, what's valued is, women going into the workforce, and also women fighting in the front lines for countries. I mean, what a weak country. And you saw in the last election, last year, the federal election, the Liberals disendorsed Ben Britton, I think it is. He was in Sydney. They disendorsed him because he said on a podcast with Joel Jammal, I think he was talking about his experience as a serviceman, and he was saying women can't be on the front lines. It's not a good thing. I've chatted to Sam Bamford as well, former army guy. He says the same thing. It's a physiological thing. They're not built for it. And also from a moral perspective, it is a very weak country that sends its women into war.
Yes.
And I think this whole idea of feminism and equal rights, whatever that means now, has sort of, I would say, has lost its core purpose, but I think its purpose has always been nefarious and to basically erode the basic Christian institutions of our society. But what it has done is completely subvert what women actually want at their core, and also completely subvert what men want at their core. They want to provide, they want to be needed, they want to have that responsibility. There is a yearning there for that. And yeah, it's just it's a very clever way they've been able to basically destroy how our society ought to work in 60 years or so.
Yeah. And you see that in some of the most egalitarian societies, in some of the societies that have allowed choice as much as humanly possible. Sweden, Norway, Denmark, those sort of Northern European nations that have socialist identities at their core, but they also have these sovereign wealth funds that allow them to do these things. You see a larger gap between men and women than you do in societies like Australia, Britain, and America, who boast about equal societies. You actually see women becoming nurses and teachers far more often, and you see men becoming bricklayers, engineers, and scientists far more often. And it just plays into when you are given free choice, because here's a fun thought. When you are incentivized to do something, it's not free choice. It's the reason that a lot of people are really railing against the idea of super PACs and the idea of lobbying groups, specifically in Australia today, is that someone gives you money and you say, oh, they gave me money because they like me for who I am, but I'm not beholden to these people.
Such nonsense.
You're incentivized as a consequence of that to continue to actually want that money. Right, you need that support, because if you build up your organization to here with that amount of funding, for you to maintain that, you need continued support. And so, I mean, the only person I think who I've ever seen turn down money like that from someone who they did have was Charlie Kirk. Obviously, it's one of the big conspiracies as to one of Candace's conspiracies as to why he might have been assassinated, which I think is just ludicrous. But it keeps the conversation going, and that's all I'm going to say.
Candace is sort of political brain rot. Like you can watch it every now and then, but it will have a bad effect on your mental capacity.
100%.
But it's a great talking point. But you're right in terms of the incentives and the lobbying groups. And people like to point at something like APAC in the US, which is a huge influence. But bringing it back locally in Australia, Susan Ley, for her entire political career up until she became deputy leader, was an ardent pro-Palestine supporter. She gets into that position in a major political party, and all of a sudden she flips and she's pro-Israel. You've got to ask, okay, well, why does that happen?
Who paid for that?
Yeah, is it just a convenience thing? Hey, you can't really represent the right-wing party if you're not a Zionist, or is it something a bit more sinister? And even that's a complete capture of conservative policy in Australia. If it's like, well, you can't be a conservative, or you can't represent the right-wing party without supporting a foreign state. Yeah,
and I find I had that conversation recently as well with Emeka, actually, and I said I find it problematic the way that, I mean, we are exactly where America was 10 years ago politically. We're in the exact same situation. And so what I said to Emeka is this. I said, we need to find a way to coalition build. We can't be single issue people on everything, where if you're a Zionist or if you're pro-Israel, you can't converse with someone who's anti-Zionist and anti-Israel, and we can't find common ground on the 99% of the other issues that exist. Because for me, for example, I'm not a Zionist in any way, shape, or form, but I believe most of the Israeli side of the conflict in terms of the or the right-wing propaganda, I guess you'd call it, from that angle. I'm more leaning on that side than I am on the from the right wing of politics, which is the Israel conspiracy theory lot, which basically says Israel controls the world. I'm much more on the other side of it, where I just say,
being a Catholic though, surely you'd be on the crusade side.
you'd think so, but no, I'm not. I am strongly in the camp of anti-conspiracy theories. I don't like the idea of big cabals and these institutions or nations or this or that exist that probably are trying to decimate the world through subvertive tactics. I think there are just good people and bad people, good ideas and bad ideas. And I don't necessarily think that, let's put it this way, if I was to pick a dog in a fight that I was gonna go up against right now, it wouldn't be the Israel lobbies and the Zionist lobbies. It would be the Islamist lobbies and the left wing abortion loving ideologies. That's the side of the world that I would definitely be fighting against, rather than the Zionist wing. And
yeah, well, you look at the main issue. So, as I was saying earlier, the APAC issue, which it seems to be the most pressing issue, basically Israel influence in American politics over there at the moment. That seems to be the thing that's being debated the most. In Australia, it's not to the same extent. I mean, obviously from the Bondi shooting, we've seen, and we should chat on this a bit later, we've seen all of this free speech laws, all of these gun ownership laws come in, and it's like, whoa, this is not right. But our influence is a lot different. So in America, where they've had the illegal immigration problem, the border's basically been shut, the deportations are taking a very long time, and it's not been what's promised. But essentially, there's no more mass illegal immigration coming into the US. There is still mass legal immigration, and that's our problem here, and that's our primary issue.
Through the H-1B visas and all that.
Yeah, over there, I mean, it's the student visas. Here in Australia, we've got millions of people here that frankly don't belong in Australia, coming in, don't speak a word of English, sort of just taking our institutions for a ride, and changing our country's identity. So our big issue is by far and away immigration from a political perspective. And you look at, okay, well, what countries is this coming into? And it's India. You look at the race commissioner, he's Indian. And he's really cracked down on basically any anti-Indian rhetoric. You saw what happened to Jacinta Price. She came out and said, hey,
she got wrecked.
Yeah, Labor's supporting, this immigration because 85% of Indians like it. I think that was a misquote of Cos Samaras as the Labor pollsters polling, which was 65%, but he originally put out 85. So there was all of that. So it sort of goes to that saying, okay, who can you not criticize at the moment? And there's a big backlash in terms of if you're criticizing Indians, if you're criticizing Muslim immigration from the Middle East, if you're criticizing these free speech laws as a response to what was obviously a blatant, anti-Semitic attack. It doesn't get more anti-Semitic than actually gunning down Jews. There's no two ways about that. But yeah, you can't come out and say, hey, maybe banning symbols isn't actually going to do a damn thing. I don't think Akram with the machine gun, with the bolt action rifle, was particularly worried about symbols. That's not going to change a thing. No. Clamping down on civil liberties of actual Australians isn't going to help either. So all of these things, they're sort of the three groups that you can't criticize much at the moment without a lot of backlash. And I think India
and Israel too. And I am on that camp because I am concerned always about free speech being tampered on two fronts, because the first one is you should be able to have free speech. And the second one is the second that you don't have free speech, you force people into underground conversations and backdoor conversations instead of out in the open where they can be lambasted for their ideas. But the Israel point I do agree with is that you should be able to say that Israel's doing wrong things. You should be able to say that, Israel has done this and Israel has done that. Where I don't like it is where innuendo comes in and you start to see people say, oh, it's Israel that is causing these issues, when they might be like for example, a lot of people will bring up that that the Bolshevik revolution the Bolsheviks in Russia were actually it was an Israeli thing. So that was one, entirely false. Two, they always say, oh, they were all Jews. There was one ethnic Jew, and no religious Jews, and then they created a Jewish genocide. But that was the start, really, of the real anti-Jewish and anti-Zionist propaganda that started to be perforated.
Well, it's been going a long
society.
time. The anti-Jewish stuff has been going.
The anti-Jewish stuff has been going forever.
Yeah,
but that's when it sort of hit our modern world again, where, because it happened again. It happened during like the Salem witch trials, and it happened during the initial Catholic revolutions and Christian revolutions throughout Europe.
Spanish Inquisition.
It pops up. Spanish Inquisition. It popped up in certain sects where suddenly you needed someone to get angry at, and you go for the people who are generally very good at making money, because they're an easy target, because they're rich and wealthy, and everyone, the general populace, can look to them and say they're the problem, they're the issue. And we're getting to that point again. And I know that I don't necessarily believe that history repeats itself, but you can see pattern lines throughout society. And we don't say it's the 1920s, but we say it's the 2020s at the moment. 100 years ago, guess the exact conversations that were starting to spread and the issues that were starting to pop up. And I was trying to link this back earlier, but Avi Yemeni, for example, who I love, who I think is awesome, but I also really like listening to Ozpil. I forgot what his actual name is, but
Hugo Lennon, I think.
That's the one, Hugo Lennon. I really enjoy listening to his content too, because he does a lot of that shock jock style content. I find him to sort of be our Nick Fuentes to an extent, but he's super anti-Zionist, and then obviously Avi Yemeni is a full Zionist.
Yeah, he fought for Israel.
Yeah, well, they all did. All Israelis have to. All citizens of Israel have to fight for Israel. And so they clashed at one of the rallies, and there was this big kerfuffle, and basically Avi Yemeni kicked what's his name out. And I said, why are you kicking him out? He represents a wing of the right-wing movement that you should be coalescing around and bringing together. You can't kick these people out and then expect them not to hate you, and then say, why do you hate us, in the same breath? That to me is insane.
Yeah, I mean, I think those rallies, the organisers behind it were perhaps a little bit less genuine than the original organisers of those other rallies. I attended both of the Marches for Australia on the 31st of August and I think it was the 13th of October in Brisbane. And yeah, found it to be a huge groundswell of support, basically saying stop immigration, stop this mass immigration. If that means complete pause for 5 years, and do that. If it's reducing the numbers, let's have that debate. I think it should be a complete pause for an extended period of time, because there's just no way we can reverse a lot of this stuff. Once they're here, it's very difficult to, fight back in the culture wars. Very different to reclaim our national identity, which is a primarily Anglo-Celtic and Christian identity. That's what built our country. That's what's going to save it. So getting all of these people in, who again are coming to Australia because they look at Australia and they say that's a really good country. Fair enough. It's not their fault. If I was living in a third world country and there was a good country, I would probably want to go to that. But we're not. Australia is a first world country, and it's a good country for a reason. And I think the more and more that we import people of cultures and ethnic backgrounds that don't create good countries, our country is going to get worse. Like, that's not a particularly hard point to get your head around. But you're right in terms of the sort of dichotomy in Australian politics now, where it's sort of, this, it seems like a bit of a controlled, level of mass immigration debate. Like, there's a controlled level of where you can bring it to. And it wasn't even being spoken about 6 months ago. It was really not until August that this sort of blew up. Then you had a few more mainstream politicians, even Hasty in the Liberal Party, getting a bit more vocal about it. But there does seem to be two sort of sects on the right as well: the civic nationalists versus the ethnic nationalists. You think of the word nationalist. What is a nationalist? It's a believer in a nation state, and having a nation is a collective group primarily based off ethnicity. That's what a nation has been historically. That's the definition of the word. And faith comes into that as well. But there is an ethnic level of that, which is why, different countries are grouped into different ethnicities as well. So I think the term civic nationalist doesn't even really make sense. It's sort of this coalescing around these vague values that maybe once existed, but that don't really now. So I don't think that really makes much sense. But yeah, it's interesting to watch at the moment that playing out.
I agree with you 100%.
Yeah, and in the lead up to Australia Day as well, there's going to be more rallies.
But yeah, and so here's where I sit on the immigration debate, so that we get our ideals aligned. So I don't believe in a full stop on immigration. I believe in much harder rules. I believe in net negative migration, which basically just means that more people should be leaving the country over the course of the next 5 years than coming in. But we should be replacing people who are leaving, because here's the thing, and you mentioned this earlier, that Donald Trump hasn't done a good job of getting people out of the country. But physically, he hasn't done a lot of it himself, but because the ideals of the nation have changed and he's stopped a lot of the fraud that exists within the country that these people can no longer exploit, they're sort of self-deporting at this stage. So they've seen something like 2 to 3 million people just self-deport, just walk themselves out of the country basically and say, well, we're not getting the benefits that we came here for, so let's take ourselves out. And so I don't believe that we necessarily need to do some sort of like hard de-immigration or emigration policy. What we need to do is coalesce our values around what it is to be Australian and say, if you are not part of this, you're just going to be physically shunned. Like if you are not going to adapt to what it is to be part of our way of life, and I prefer the term way of life to culture, because culture is a third person perspective. So like I would see Indian way of life as a culture, but for them, it's just what they do on a Tuesday. And so our way of life here in Australia is very specific and has been for the better part of 150 years now. That way of life is under threat because of the amount of people at the rate at which we are bringing them into the nation. Immigration has always been a part of our history, from Europeans, Italians, Maltese, Spanish, Germans. We've always brought people in pockets, but we knew how to deal with that specific subset of people, and we knew how to properly integrate them into the Australian way of life. We're not doing that anymore. It's too fast. We're bringing people from too many places, and we are not able, so for Filipinos, for example, integrate really well into Australian society and the Australian way of life. There are cultures that can do it easier than others, and once you figure out how, because they've got one way of life, you can bring them in, allow that population to grow and spread throughout Australia, and then they just become part of the Australian way of life. I'm not sure where you sit on that, but that's the way that I view moving forwards, how we can actually tackle this issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think because our country's so young, comparatively speaking, across the world, we've got to look at immigration very different, basically pre and post World War II. And pre-World War II and early colonial days, they were not immigrants, they were settlers. They were settlers that were building a country. Since World War II, and you'd probably argue more so since the 70s onwards, these have been economic migrants coming to Australia for a better opportunity, which again, it's not their fault. You know, if you've got an opportunity,
I'm one of them.
Yeah. If you've got an opportunity for your children to provide a better way of life, then you're going to go to a better country. That makes sense. But we can't ignore the fact that that's going to change the face of the country. And I suppose you've got to take ideas sometimes to the extreme and then work backward to see, okay, what's the actual truth of the matter here? So in my mind, if I was to ask, what does it mean to be Australian? I would strongly push back on this idea that it's a culture. I would strongly push back that it's subscribing to this set of values. I would say it's something more inherent. There is an ethnic part of it. There is a faith-based part of it as well. I don't think that, citizenship tests are doing a good job at the moment, and they sort of loosely outline the Australian values, that might just say mateship. And it's like, yeah, sure, I agree with that. I'm sure, what's his name? Akram's father, the other Bondi shooter, I'm sure when he was getting his visa, he had to sort of agree to a few of these vague sort of values. And guess what? It didn't make him Australian. And it's not making the people that are getting citizenship Australian either. And more to the point, now that we've got all of these ethnic enclaves in Western Sydney, in Melbourne as well, I lived in Melbourne for the first 6 months of last year, and I got to tell you, it felt like a different country. These immigrants that are coming here, subscribing to our way of life, not really speaking our language, obviously bringing a different culture and identity, worshipping in different gods, all of these sort of things. They're then raising their children not in the broader community a lot of the time. They're raising them in those enclaves where
Yes.
they're basically being raised in Little China or Little India. So I think from that respect, it's like, okay, well then, does being born in Australia make you Australian? And you'd like to say yes, but if in that example, it's probably a no. There's nothing really Australian about that. So you really have to draw it out, I think, a bit more. And I think ethnicity is a big part of it. And we're an Anglo-Celtic country primarily. And when we have shifted away from that, and obviously Christianity, like I said, 1901, 96% Christian, now we're 40%. It's funny how those two sort of align. If you look at the stats about Anglo-Celtic heritage since the foundation, since Federation, up until now, it's basically been 1-for-1 with Christianity. That's because ethnicities bring a certain level of, shared identity and orientation toward a higher being, and obviously ours is Christ. So
I would
these
push
different
back.
things happen. You go.
Sorry, no,
You're
finish your thought. Finish your thought.
No. So yeah, basically just saying that I think being an Australian is a lot more inherent than subscribing to a set of values, and I think we're seeing that sort of play out in our streets right now. We're seeing it play out as we go to the shops, and you're sort of playing spot the Aussie, like it's sort of right in your face.
Well, I do see that. I do see that quite often, especially when they're doing video broadcasts. I'm not sure if you watched any of the New Year's Eve fireworks.
Yeah, saw a few of them.
But the whole shoreline was non-Anglo at all. Like I could not spot one Anglo, and I'm probably on the opposite side of that train, where I don't believe that ethnicity has too much to play in terms of your value set. I think that there are certain ethnicities where that's true. But for example, like if you get Fijian Indians, for example, Fijian Indians are almost all Catholics. If you get a lot of the northern, mid-north Africans, most of them are Christians. If you go to South India and West India, a lot of them are Catholics, and so or Christians. And so ethnicity to me means far less than the ideology that people prescribe themselves to, because you can be any color that you want. You can come from any place on earth. But what I do agree with you on is that there is a predisposition to acknowledging that someone came up or was brought up in a Christian perspective due to their ethnicity. Like if you see someone from Iran or someone from Iraq, your first thought is that person is a Muslim. But as a general rule of thumb, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are. And so
Palestinians as well. There's a ton of Palestinian Christians that have fled and gone to different countries and made.
Well, they've all fled because there's only like 0.01% of Christians left in Palestine.
Yeah. So, but my point being, so like to take it to its furthest end, Nigerian Christians per se. If Australia was to become majority Nigerian Christian, is it still Australia?
Well, it depends on a couple of things. One is that you can't just import all of those people instantly, and the reasoning behind where I struggle with it is that you're Nigerian only by your skin tone. I mean, I grew up with a Nigerian guy, and he was more Australian than me in many respects in terms of the way that he lived his life. He loved soccer. He loved sports. He was all into everything to do with Australian sports. Very physical, super Christian guy, and he was brilliant. I loved him. I grew up with a Rwandan bloke who was very Christian as well, and I had never once thought to myself, oh, "You don't belong here in Australia." Growing up in Western Sydney, I always found that the multi-ethnic melting pot made sense as long as you were built within a religious framework that actually built you up along the same pathway. My class was 17 people only in my year group. We were 2 Maltese, 3 Italians, 4 Filipinos, 2 Africans, a lot of Croatians, and the rest of them were all Australian. And of those of those people, I would say the only ones who maintained the faith were the non-Australians leading into the rest of their lives. The ones who still go to church are the non-Australians. So the ones who still prescribe to the ideas that you and I probably share from a faith and moral perspective are the ones who were not born here or their parents weren't born here.
But you just described them. That's sort of the point, though. You've just described them as non-Australians, which is sort of. I'm not debating whether.
I know what you're saying from a semantic perspective, like non-Anglo Australians. Yes.
Yeah, but you would say, okay, are there, in your mind, then, do you think there are different levels of Australian, which is sort of this debate that Vivek Ramaswamy's come out and said there's not any different levels of American. You know, if you come here, get your H-1B visa, and then become a citizen, you're as American as, you know, the guys that got off the Mayflower. Is, in your perspective, is there
only from an ethnic level? Only from an ethnic level. So, like, but for example, that's well, in terms of your ability to be called an Australian. Not really. I think you might caveat it. Like, for example, I'm Maltese. I was born in Malta. I came here when I was 3 years old. But Malta's a bit of a different one because we were under British rule for 200 odd years, 300 odd years. So Malta's sort of a weird one. But no, I don't see from a value set people who have a background that is non-Australian. That is to say, if your family has been here for 100 years or 200 years or 300 years, that you are any less Australian from a values perspective. But I wouldn't call your ethnicity Australian. But where I think we will struggle is if we start to break people down to how long they've been in a certain place or a certain, like, you could be in a job for 2 months and say, my boss is an idiot, he's been here for 10 years. Like, how does he still have a job? So just because the Australian population, and look at the people who vote for the policies that we all dislike. As a general rule of thumb, it is always the same as in America. It is white liberal women. That is to say, ethnically Australian/British liberal women. And so I struggle with the idea that the value set can be attached to the ethnicity, and that the ethnicity not being a white identitarian or Anglo identitarian Australian is somehow going to degrade your ability to add to the values of this nation and live within its way of life.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
I suppose, though, what's the source, what's the origination of that way of life? Like, where have we actually come from?
Anglo-Christian doctrine. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah.
So with that then comes, okay, the idea of adding to it means not overtaking it. And it's getting to a point of overtaking, which is sort of the point.
Yeah, but neither Jew nor Greek, Roman nor Phoenician, Egyptian nor this. If you take it from a biblical perspective, we should not be identifying people in any way, shape, or form based upon their ethnicity rather than taking them off their value set. That's where I think that we'll run into problems.
But that's in terms of salvation. Like, that verse in particular is talking about salvation in Christ.
Yes.
I 100% agree with that. There's no difference in moral worth at all between the Indian and between me and between you. No difference whatsoever between anyone on earth. That's the starting basis. It's a different conversation to then say, okay, then that means open borders, bring everyone in, or even in a smaller extent. But again, even the verse that I quoted earlier on, the Great Commission, go out and make disciples of all nations. What is a nation? It's sort of, there are distinct ethnic groups that exist, and many of them share cultural subsets, as they do. Many of them don't, like us and, say, Iraq or something.
Yes, agreed.
I don't have a problem with Iraq necessarily existing. I have a problem that they worship a false god, and we're called to go and make disciples of their nation. But I also say, okay, they're over there doing their thing. How about we preserve what we believe to be true and what is true here? I don't see it as a matter of I think it's actually problematic to conflate verses around salvation, which go to do with moral worth, then into, okay, what's going to best build a strong Australia, a strong nation? Because I think those are two.
I understand. So that prescription, and I've spoken about this several times, is that I believe that Judaism or the Old Testament is the best way in order to build a nation. that Christianity and Catholicism is the best way to ensure the salvation of your soul, which leans into both the body and the state as well. And Islam is probably one of the best ways that you can go about maintaining your body in terms of just the matters of the flesh, for specifically men. So prescribing to the Judaic rules around nation building, that's probably the best way to go about it in terms of creating a national identity based upon ethnicity, that you are a chosen people in some way. The issue that I have is that we've sort of we've fulfilled that as a Christian nation, as a Christian doctrine. And you can say it's an element of the faith and your salvation to go to heaven, but oughtn't we try and best emulate the teachings and the grace of God on earth in the same way with our neighbor as we do? And I mean, I'm sure you know the parable of the Good Samaritan, that we ought to help where people are in need. But in the same way, I don't believe in an open borders policy. It's identitarian insofar as it is ideas, not ethnicity. That's where I'm stuck on.
Yeah, I mean, I just think ideas often follow ethnicity, and it's not a fait accompli, but there's a very strong correlation. And again, I sort of go back to the question of, obviously, salvation in Christ is what matters most. That is what we're called to do, to bring glory to God here on earth. And then we debate how to best do that. But I don't think we're doing that at the moment by having a weak, limp-wristed Christianity that sort of says, okay, we sort of have to welcome people in, because that's sort of how we've got to this point in the first place. Like, we've allowed ourselves to be compromised. Our churches have been very weak throughout the 60s, throughout the whole sexual revolution, to the point where now you go to a uniting church and it's got gay pride flags on the...
Yeah, it's shocking.
They do a welcome to country where they talk about Aboriginal spirituality, which isn't the Holy Spirit, at the beginning of services. There are Catholic services that do that as well. I don't know why that's happening.
I've never seen that. But
yeah, a couple of ones.
I have seen some welcome to countries.
Yeah.
I have seen some welcome to countries, but they come and go. It just depends on who the secretary is, basically, at the church.
Yeah, and I suppose my proposition is, well, we've got a nation to build and defend here, and at the moment we're not reflecting Christ's glory at all in our public policy. We're not reflecting Christ's glory in the fact that the majority of our population isn't Christian. We're not reflecting Christ's glory in the way that we don't value the family. We don't value reproducing. Okay, what's the best source to be able to do that? It is to have a distinctly Christian identity. Now, does that mean that you're bringing in, that you've got a profession of faith necessarily on a citizenship test? You're only bringing in Christians or something like that? I think a better way to be able to achieve that end is by having a return to a primarily Anglo-Celtic Australia, which orients itself toward Christ. And I think it's a difference between moral worth again and building a nation. And we should be, I want to get to a point where we're a strong enough Christian nation where our identity is so strongly in Christ and our public policy reflects that glory. But when we're not a failing nation, then maybe we can talk about being kind and bringing all of these people in that basically worship different gods, don't hold a similar culture, live in ethnic enclaves. But I think we're not at that point. We're nowhere near that point, and we're far closer to Australia not being Australia anymore, because we've just become this mishmash, this melting pot of all of these different cultures that don't mix and that really just produce something that is not homogenous and not functioning for the glory of Christ in and of itself. Again, look at all of our public policy. It has got worse without doubt since our Anglo-Celtic heritage has been whittled away. And I think you would argue that's primarily because it's Christian. I would as well. It's a spiritual thing. But what sort of, we're talking about who's coming into the country, we've got to understand, okay, well, what people necessarily have an identity toward Christ and sort of fit the Australian mold of what Australianism has been historically.
And on that, I 100% agree. On that, I agree without a doubt. The only caveat I've got is the white Anglo, because I mean, from a percentage perspective, pretty much everywhere except white Anglo in the world today is more religious and Christian than white Anglo. So if you were to pick people out of a hat, you're more likely going to actually pick up someone who is Christian in identity and practice from a non-Anglo nation than you are to pick them from an Anglo nation. Like, pick a Filipino out of a hat, 100% he's Catholic, like 99% chance that they are Catholic. And so the Anglo side of it, for me, it can, you know, it doesn't mean too much more than it does the value set that people come in with. Because, I mean,
so what are the value set then? What is the value set?
Christian values, entirely Christian values. But Christian is not, I mean, Christian didn't start with Anglo.
No, of course.
And it certainly doesn't end with Anglo. And so I feel as though creating racial or ethnic identitarianism is going to make us lose a lot of really, really good people who would otherwise, so for example, a Mecca, right? Very strong, very Christian, very, very outspoken, very successful capitalist guy who believes in, you know, pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, taking your cross upon your shoulder, following Christ every step of the way, no matter if it hurts him to be truthful or not. I mean, you saw the spin that they put against him in the ABC. And so ethnic selection in order to achieve the value, the Christian value set that we want in our society, I think will run the risk of reducing the number of people that we can really bring into a course correction on what it is to be a good nation. And you will run into that problem, I think, in the future, because the majority of people in this country now are not Anglo. That's just plain and simple.
Well, you made it clear, you said it a couple of times, and it's very true in terms of how the Anglo worship of Christ has also diminished. And that's sort of what I've spoken about. It's not as though 96% of Anglo, there's a huge atheist population now in what we would call traditional Australians. So with that in mind, I think that's a separate issue. So I think that's a separate issue in terms of the degradation of Western culture, which we can talk about. And the other side of the immigration debate is the child, the family, the fertility rate, all of this sort of stuff. I think those are two separate arguments and two separate problems. I guess what I'm concerned about is this idea that there is no such thing as an Australian other than signing up to a number of different values. So I suppose I would ask, well, in terms of the levels of Australianism, is the unsaved eighth generation Australian less Australian than the Christian Nigerian that's just come into the country?
No, I think that I more prescribe to Vivek Ramaswamy's version of it from an ideals perspective. But like I said, if you are an Australian who came here 5 minutes ago and you're an Australian who's been here for 15 generations, obviously there is an ethnic difference in terms of your ethnicity. You wouldn't say, oh yeah, I'm a, you know, true blue Aussie that, you know, my family's been here for generations and generations. Conflating what it is to be an Australian in terms of your way of life and the policies and the laws and the culture that you prescribe to, and conflating the ethnic origin, I don't think that we can really do that. I understand what you're saying, and to an extent, there's an agreement in that there's a difference between a Nigerian Australian from a colours perspective, or even the history that you've learnt at a young age, and that perspective obviously is very different. Like Maltese, I know a lot about Maltese history, for example, but I came here and I learnt a butt ton about Australian history, and how I went to my entire schooling life here, and so I don't necessarily see how any Australian has, I guess, more of a claim than I do, outside of maybe they've got a few more family graves. And you know, when a builder has been building his whole life and he drives his kid through a neighborhood and says, oh, my dad built that, my dad built that, my dad built that. So there is I come from that place. Like, oh, my granddad used to live in that house and my great granddad lived in that house. So there is a historiosity that exists within the back of your mind. but I don't agree that it makes you less Australian from a values set. For example, if we take from a value set, so if we take the parable of the talents, for example, or even the parable of the workers, where the master went out and at the beginning of the day gave one talent and said, here's one talent, go work the field. At midday, he did the same thing and gave each of them a talent leading up to the last 10 minutes of the day, basically. And when the one who did a whole day's work and the one who did 10 minutes of work spoke about how much they had been given for the day, the one who worked an entire day was upset that the master had given someone who had 10 minutes worth of work the same amount of money he'd had for a full day's worth of work. And the master says, were you not happy with your one talent when I offered it? And so we can see sort of a parallel there to an extent, right? Where it doesn't matter as long as you do the work that the master has prescribed to us.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I think that's the disagreement. I think that's the disagreement in terms of what a distinct nation is. And I think Australians are a distinct nation. Brazil is a distinct nation. My church is full of Brazilians. I love them. I wouldn't want them necessarily out of the country because I love them. They're great. They have helped my journey in sanctification with Christ as well. They're incredible people. But if there were 26 million Brazilians in Australia, it wouldn't be Australia anymore. It'd be Brazil. Australia is not just it is the land. It is the culture. It is the identity as well, though. And I think
because I think we're like you can look at an Australian and you can look at a British person and you can see the daylight between those two nations, even just after 300 years, right? Those ethnicities. And so maybe is it just a time thing? But do we have to treat someone today who's just walked into the place less than as a consequence of the fact that they walked in today, where in 300 years from now their descendants will be as Australian as you were, I guess, when you said you're not really Australian?
But a variation of Australian. Like in that respect, I mean, again, to use the Nigerian Christian coming in, they're not going to look like an Australian in 300 years the way that people that came on the first fleet and their descendants now look like Australians. They're not going to necessarily speak in the same way for a few generations as well. So I think, I mean, it goes back to, it's not a matter of being lesser, but it's being different. And there are these distinct differences. There are different nations. I mean, you're proud of your Maltese heritage, no doubt. I've got a bit of well,
we're pretty screwed. The Maltese nation today is so corrupt, it's not funny. So
yeah.
The heritage is cool.
there would be elements of it that you're like, that is a part of
the Crusades. But that's where I feel like there's a shared history, obviously, because we're Christian, identitarian. And I speak about that. I'm actually writing. I'm actually. You can read it when I'm done and tell me how many things I got wrong. But I'm writing a book about it right now. I'm speaking about the way that Christian identity replaces the historicity of cultures, basically, and how prescribing to the Christian identity gives you a shared history for all of the saints, all of the prophets, all of the preachers, all of the martyrs, all of the people who have come for the last effectively 4,000 years of human history when you go back into the Old Testament. And so you don't have to prescribe to a nationalist identity when you have this Christian identity that you're all working towards. And the nationalism sort of sits on top of that to an extent, where you're then like, I like my local soccer team, I like my neighbors, I like my country, and then I like my nation. And so that's where I think the Christian element will supersede the ethnicity element, because then your shared history is the history of the Bible rather than the history of your nation.
Oh, yeah. Yes, I understand that. To an extent, I understand that, and I agree with it. I think there is, I mean, obviously it's Christ, it's family, then your duties to your nation. It's in that order. There's no question about that. But again, we're having a very theoretical debate around this. This is neither of our positions is anything near what's happening at the moment.
Yeah, agreed.
We're getting in overwhelmingly people from third world countries who have probably heard of Christ and denied him, essentially.
Yeah, or lied.
Or they've lied on the citizenship test. Not that the questions there are particularly strong anyway. So it's sort of we're having a good debate, and I like it. But in terms of practical sense,
we could bring it back to the actual conversation.
Which is
today.
which is over 500,000 people coming in, primarily from India, China, large Pakistani
Nepal, a big
influx
one
as well, not to the same extent as the UK, but it's building. So all of these different things, there's nothing like our country is getting less and less Christian with this way of thinking that has been in place for 60 years. So there is a reactionary element to it as well. I love my country. I want to preserve my country, and I want Australia to look and feel like Australia. And I believe Christianity is 100% at the core of that. But I'm also a realist in terms of a nation is a group of people, an ethnicity, which includes a shared culture, and that culture is a Christian one. So I think that it's a leading indicator. It's not the be all end all, I agree, but there is such a thing as a distinct Australian. Like you said, maybe it takes a few hundred years to get to that point. We were British. People like to diminish the fact that, we were just a bunch of convicts and that was it. It wasn't Christianity at all. That's nonsense.
They're all Catholic.
All of these different
they're all
things.
Irish Catholics. The first thing that was built was a church.
Irish Catholics, and then in the 1800s, you had the Lutherans come out from Germany and go into South Australia, gold diggers. Victoria. Yeah, in Victoria as well. So all of these different things, it does take a while to build that, I guess, that idea of a nation in the first place. Like it took us until 1901 to get to that point. But I don't think anyone can say that there aren't levels of being Australian when you look at how our nation is going at the moment. I just put it back to, we are not glorifying God whatsoever in our public policy. We're not and I agree that's a big level of self-hatred from the Western world, which is the Australian populace, which we need to deal with. But I don't think the answer to that is importing foreign cultures.
No, I agree, and that's where I don't think that the major impetus is really going to start with immigration as much as it's going to start with loving who we are as Catholics and Christians again, and saying, you know what, I want to go forth and multiply. I want to go and have as many children as humanly possible, and make ourselves undeniable, because either we are going to breed ourselves, I guess, out of existence to an extent, because when we're so worried about making sure that we give our kids a good life in terms of a monetary perspective instead of a great life in terms of a family values perspective. But also just the fear and the worry of not knowing what tomorrow's Australia is going to look like, instead of saying, hey, let's pick up our cross and we're going to actually lead the way, and we're going to be the ones that have all the children that are going to be the voting bloc of the next generation.
Yeah, 100%. And that's what the Muslims are doing at the moment in Western Sydney. They're coming in. I think there was something where on the citizenship test for under 18s, there was a checkbox of, have you been married before, for the under 18. So that's sort of, okay, clear. This is countercultural to our pre-existing Christian culture here in Australia. Why, if that even has to be a question, shouldn't be on the cards that these people are coming into the country. But they 100%. Are multiplying. They're having 6, 7, 8, 9 kids in Western Sydney, and the Christians, generally speaking, aren't having that many. Now, you are far more experienced. You've got married at a young age. You've already got three young children. I'm getting married in March, and we certainly plan to go forth and multiply.
Good man.
Yeah, but it's what we're called to do, and I agree. It is the other side to the immigration debate, and I suppose it gets to the core of this. It takes 18 years for a kid to grow up and, I guess, really contribute to the broader society. People like to say they're an economic drain. I think the Deputy Liberal Leader's Chief of Staff had been posting about how kids are an economic drain until 18, so immigration is better. I
saw that.
Yeah. It was a while back, but he hasn't pronounced the comments at all. So all of these different things, but it is the flip side. I don't want Australians being replaced, but right now, because of the fact that we're having so few children, and our current politics is as weak as it is, where it's oriented not towards a worship of Christ, but to a worship of the GDP, not necessarily GDP per capita, not quality of life, anything like that, but just so the line keeps going up. So Jim Chalmers and the Reserve Bank governor can come out and say, oh yeah, all's looking good. Yeah, exactly. But so long as it's oriented toward that, and we're having 1.4 is the replacement rate at the moment, this is going to continue to happen. So I think we do, as Christians in particular, need to lead the way, and I thank you for doing that. And I pray that we're able to as well, me and my soon-to-be wife. But that's the other side. We need to have children. And Tucker Carlson mentioned it in a recent interview. It is probably a great indicator of whether you respect yourself is whether you're wanting to reproduce.
Yeah.
If you respect yourself, your identity, your culture, and I guess we've seen that on the flip side where people have been so alarmed about this climate alarmism, which has come about because of the exploitation of workers and industrial, just digging up coal and having cheap energy and raising the quality of life. I never mentioned that. But all of these different things. And then it's like, oh, well, I don't want to bring children into the world because they're going to have a negative impact on the climate, which is sort of that self-hatred that we can chat about, which starts in the education system, which I see every day. But I agree. So thank you for having
and that's your
kids and leading the way, Mark.
That's your bread and butter. Thanks, mate. I'm not sure anyone's thanked me for having children before. That's a first.
There you go. You already had your one for the country as well.
Exactly,
if you go
right.
back to Costello days.
Peter Costello, mate. I tell my wife that all the time. We've done our due diligence, but she now wants an army. So she said that was batch 1, and now we need batch 2, apparently. So there might be a few more on the way.
That's awesome.
Children, we'll get into this because children, teachers, health of the country, that's your bread and butter, right? Nurses, teachers, Red Union is your company. Tell us a bit about it. Tell us what you do and how you're trying to fight even the culture war, I guess, through your business.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I've only come on board in the last couple of years. So it was built in 2012. Basically, a group of nurses on the Sunshine Coast got together after there was yet another Queensland Health payroll bungle where nurses were overpaid and underpaid, all of this sort of stuff. And it was an election year. And the union, which is obviously heavily Labor aligned, didn't want to say anything, didn't want to rock the boat ahead of the Labor, impending Labor landslide loss to Campbell Newman at that point. So this group of nurses got together, sick of the political dependence on the Labor Party, the inability to fight for the interests of nurses first. So they decided to form a group called the Nurses Professional Association of Queensland. That expanded to every state. And basically, in 2018, when our managing director, Jack McGuire, came on board, set up what's known as the Red Union Support Hub, which is a service provider to all of these different state-based associations across health, education, policing, fireys as well, independent workers, doctors, to basically service alternative unions to the mainstream ALP supporting unions. So we started the Alternative Education Union at the end of 2019, and that's everywhere in Australia. So in New Zealand as well, we've expanded to New Zealand. But basically, the entire point is to provide nurses, teachers, frontline workers with the best possible services at the best possible price. And because we don't give so much money to the ALP and the sort of broader left-wing social and political causes, we're basically half the price, or about 2/3 of the price. So that's sort of why we exist in the first place, is because of the decades and decades of failure and betrayal from the mainstream unions, where they basically overcharged and then gone off and supported all of these left-wing social issues. So we mentioned it earlier.
And failed.
Yeah, 100%. Well, the gay marriage issue, the voice to parliament, basically every single state and federal election when there are Labor candidates on the ballot, you rock up to a polling booth and there'll be union cars there. All of this sort of stuff. We estimate that there's about $700 million every single year in excess fees charged across the union movement. Now, they'll dispute that and say, oh, look at the donations. There's only a few million really going through. And that's true in declared donations. But we're talking, that's the tip of the iceberg. We're talking about the call centres, the support on election day, the third-party campaigns. We saw it in the Queensland state election, this abortion scare campaign that was run ahead of the...
Insane.
Yeah, in 2024.
And they're trying to do are they trying to sue, what's her name? Joanna Howe, because she set up a game of some sort to try and make a bit of money to cover costs.
Yeah, right. That sounds the New South Wales Nurse and Midwives Association, I think, down there. But again, that's and then they fund pro-abortion campaigns. So this is a midwives union. Midwives, all of their members do not support the murdering of innocent children in the womb. It is literally their job to nurture them and bring them to birth. So I think is the most grotesque but clear example of the fact that these union executives are taking hardworking members' money. They're sort of fuddling the messaging. Oh, it's about human rights. It's about bodily autonomy, blah, 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 whatever it is. It's never, oh, yeah, we want to kill babies. They're never going to say that.
They never say that.
Yeah.
They don't even class it as a baby unless they decide they want to class it as a baby. And then it's a baby, but it's not a baby. It's a baby only if you can think that it's a baby. But if you can't think that it's a baby, then it's definitely not a baby.
Yeah, which doesn't wash. It doesn't wash with the members, which again is sort of why we exist, is because these unions have become social and political tools. Basically, the entire funding model of the Labor Party. Many people might not know this, but the Labor Party is literally the political wing of the union movement. The union movement started and they created the Labor Party. Very different. So you look at the Labor Party even during the days of Keating, going back even further, one of the best wartime prime ministers, John Curtin, all of these different things, they had nothing to do with the sort of left-wing social rot that the Labor Party and the current union movement funds. So that's sort of where we come in.
Because the general population was all Christian.
Yeah, well, the general population was Christian. Labor had a huge Catholic influence as well. The SDA, the Shoppies Union, they were massive Catholics. But there was even a former, I forget his name, but a former head of the SDA, I think, big Catholic guy. I think John de Brun is his name. He went to Australian Catholic University to give basically a speech. And he was like the only guy in the union movement that was against gay marriage because he's a Catholic and he's actually practicing that faith. And he comes out, he's a diehard Labor guy, but he comes out and he gives this speech and all of the ACU members, this was last year, I think, all the ACU students walk out. This is a Catholic university. It is. And they're shunning him because he actually stood up for the Catholic faith in the face of this whitewashing of the union movement. So
yeah, I had my cousin went to ACU. I had several of my family members go there but it's Catholic in name only.
Oh, 100%.
But that's every university, that's every institution, basically, with any sort of modicum of authority when it comes to education. It is so captured entirely by the financing structure that allows for them to retain these massive endowment fees, basically, from all of their students, and for them not to get taxed to high heavens by a government, they have to basically subscribe to these left-wing ideologies, and also that's who they get funding from. And the public school system is the one that really bugs me the most, because the public school system is just one big propaganda tunnel for the left wing of politics.
Private's not much better.
It entirely.
Yeah.
Well, the private at least you know what you're getting. It's like I always say with the ABC versus Sky News and the Australian and all that. At least when you go to the Australian and you go to Sky News, you know you're getting right-wing politics. The ABC purports to be a public institution that is meant to be a centrist institution that just gives the news, in the same way that public education is supposed to be an institution that just gives the facts. But with the way that the curriculums have been designed, all the way from the what is it called now, NECA or whatever it is, all the way down, it's almost impossible. It's almost impossible to say it's anything other than propaganda. And I worry for a generation that is going to grow up, and I hope for one that will rebel, because kids like to do that, against the status quo. But I worry for a generation that has been for their entire lives told, if you're in a hard place, don't worry about it, the government will look after you. And that becomes status quo.
Yeah, I think there is a big reactionary impulse from Gen Z, which I actually don't think is a bad thing. I mean, it's what's going to happen. I mean, you've got kids, you have a better idea than me, but children naturally will revolt against what they're being told is the only correct thing to be.
Yeah.
So that's sort of where we find ourselves. But just to expand on what I was saying about how there's not much of a difference a lot of the time, I think the problem is you don't actually know what you're getting when you sign up for a lot of these private schools. Give you an example. Last year, Anglican school, I think called Trinity Grammar in Melbourne, very famous institution, $40,000 a year tuition, all of this sort of stuff. They still have to bend the knee to get government funding. So what they're doing is They brought in they celebrated Pride Month at an Anglican school. They brought in a queer pro-Palestinian speaker to speak to all boys about sexuality at an Anglican school. And some of the kids were like, who is this guy? I looked at his social media and basically just completely grotesque, doing sex acts on his social media, all of this sort of stuff. And this is what you're getting for $40,000 a year in a supposedly Christian institution. And there are so many different examples of that. That's just one that was publicized. The Australian Herald Sun did a big piece on it as well. So my point is, you're not getting what you think you're getting a lot of the time with private schools.
That's terrifying.
I think on average, you're right. On average, you get a better education in private schools. There is that truth. But they do slap the bend the knee for funding. I mean, up here in Queensland, I went to BCE schools, so Brisbane Catholic Education. I was at what's called an ecumenical school, so had 4 different Christian faith traditions at the one school. And it wasn't a uniquely Christian thing. It was a better school than you would have got at public, 100%. You generally had better kids, better parents around there, better teachers. But it was by no means that. And I guess one more example about that, we're currently negotiating, so the TPAA, the Alternative Education Union, we're currently negotiating in the Victorian Catholic Education Enterprise Agreement. So this is the VCEA, the Victorian Catholic Education Authority. We're negotiating with them. Can't go too much into negotiations while it's going on. Obviously. But one of our claims is basically protection for teachers who refuse to go along with transgender ideology.
Oh, awesome.
One of our core claims. There is pushback, and it is controversial at the bargaining table. I can't talk much more about it, but you would think that with a Catholic organization, it would be very clear cut. Hey, okay, what's the Vatican's teaching on this? You know, what's Pope Leo's stance on this? It's pretty clear. So why is this even controversial? We're not saying you banish children at all. We're not saying you treat them with hostility. We're not saying you have a free card to abdicate your duty of care. That's horrific. What we're saying is Catholic teachers at a Catholic school in a Catholic system in historically one of the most Catholic states in the country should have protection from basically going along with this transgender cult ideology,
100%.
Completely antithetical to their faith, and it's facing pushback. So that's sort of an insight.
I've felt that for the last 10 years. So I went to a school system. It's outside of the traditional Catholic systems. It's I'm not sure if you know what Opus Dei is, but it's a Catholic sect.
Yes, I've heard of it. Yeah.
So it is. It's from Spain. They created a group of schools that are under the PARED system. It's called. So it's Parents for Education. So we've got Redfield, Tangara, Wallamaya, Montgrove, and for the last 10 years, the government has been harassing the schools because they aren't beholden to the Catholic education system, which is private, again, in name only, in that it's a private education, but it's so heavily funded by the government due to the streaming system that they require the money in order to continue. But these schools are far more independent. They still get government funding, but they're not as beholden to the government because of the pockets that we're in, which is mostly high density, more at the time rural. It's in Dural now, but Western Sydney. The government needed schools there, and so we just got funding as a consequence. And so we were able to be taught proper Catholic Christian doctrine. We didn't do SOR, or Studies of Religion, which is the major religion class. I'm not sure if you did that too. SOR2, we didn't do SOR2 because SOR or SOR2, because those ones are just, you learn every faith and it's just a study of faith rather than a study in faith. We just did religion as apologetics, as philosophy, as Christian and Catholic doctrine, whereas all the other Catholic schools now in the area, they're doing transgender bathrooms, they're acquiescing to government policy, and it terrifies me that for the sake of the god of money, we have to let the institutions that created such peace in our society fall to pieces.
Yeah, no, 100%. It's a dire situation, and obviously public education is far worse. It's completely devoid of any moral structure a lot of the time beyond the safe schools and respectful relationships, sort of pro, sex ed in very graphic details at young ages, all of this sort of stuff. The transgender Pride Month flags up everywhere, teachers wearing the rainbow lanyards when they're teaching kindergarten kids. Like, all of this stuff has a very perverse agenda. And I don't think a lot of the time the people participating in it genuinely know what they're doing and how they're being used. So I have some level of sympathy for them. They like to think it's in the name of acceptance and diversity, and they haven't been able to put their thoughts outside of that because, to be fair, it has been a not unacceptable position to have anything other than that. And people like to say confined to these things, particularly if they're not Christian, and they're sort of the thing that they are worshipping is necessarily money and their career. So they've got a self-preservation aspect that we as Christians don't. So that is a big issue. But these people are teaching children. These people are teaching children in mainstream education. Our members are wholeheartedly against it. So we ran a survey mid last year about transgender ideology in the classrooms, and 91% of our teachers said,
wow,
we don't want it in there at all. 97% said there's no excuse for transgender surgeries whatsoever. 85%, I think, attributed it largely to a social contagion. And we don't necessarily have conservative members. We just have members that want cheaper fees and don't want to provide funding to the left side of politics. That doesn't mean that they're right wing. So we've got all of these this clear data coming through that teachers don't support this whatsoever. But like I said, in the bargaining at the moment, the institutions are still pushing this big time, and they're going to push it even harder as there is that reactionary pushback from kids in schools that we are seeing. I mean, I coached a under 14s footy team for a couple of years,
nice.
2 and 3 years ago, and chatting to them about the sort of stuff that goes on in their schools, the self-hatred of our country, how we're on stolen land and we have nothing to be proud of, the emasculating men agenda as well, basically talking about how there's no distinct role for men in society. Women and men basically the same. They can do the same thing, whatever. All of these sort of things has led to a real concerning, to some extent, reactionary pushback from kids, where they're gravitating toward the complete opposite of that, which isn't necessarily good either. The complete opposite of this, I would argue the complete opposite should be, a godly perspective on this, because it's an ungodly one that they're getting pushed. But they're going to, some of the more, perverted,
the radical voices.
Yeah, the perverted masculinity. It's not. I mean, they like to say toxic. I don't like using their language. It's just stupid. Yeah, but it's perverted. It's perverted masculinity. Talking about guys like Andrew Tate, who's got multiple wives, set up a prostitution business, all of this sort of stuff. Like, sure, I think a lot of young men find him entertaining and funny, but he is no moral role model whatsoever for young men. And
not a chance.
Seeing that reaction, but so it is sort of a case of be careful what you wish for a lot of these people, what they're pushing in schools, because you're going to get something far worse in return. And that's what we're seeing with this, with our politics at the moment as well. There is a strong reactionary right coming back to a lot of this stuff. You've seen it in the lead up to World War II. Look at Germany during the Weimar Republic period.
Yes.
You had this social decadence, child brothels, all of this horrific stuff, this transgender stuff rising again. This is not the first trans thing that has ever happened in the history of the world, as you know, Mark. This is history repeating itself. And you think of all of the similarities right now where we are with the Weimar Republic, and then what comes next. You'd think that people with a bit more hindsight would say, hey, maybe we should, wind a lot of this stuff back. Hey, maybe this isn't actually going to head in a right direction. Because it doesn't end at.
No. And as a general rule of thumb, that's why I'm so antithetical to the position that Tony Burke and Chris Minns have taken in New South Wales to really shut down the NSN, because that's how the Nazi movement became big in Germany. They put Hitler in jail. They tried to put him away for to silence him. And the more that you try to silence people like this, the more that they become powerful, because they're not the only disenfranchised people in the world. And the more that these policies start to fall apart, and the more that they hang on with a death grip, right, the more they flail and they start to introduce crazy policies just quickly to try and claw back the economic situation and the social situation, the more people are going to realize, oh, the NSN was right. The NSN was right. Everything they were saying was correct. And they're going to end up falling into the trap that so many Germans fell into in the 1930s and 1940s. And I don't see how people are not noticing this. And the same language so the way I do my show is I do 3 days a week, and then whenever I get a chance to interview someone, I have a chat with Emeka. We try and do it weekly whenever we're available, and then I'll line up interesting conversations like this one. On my daily show now, 3 times it's just news reactions. The 3 times now, the Labour government spokespeople have let the word regime slip out. This is part of the new regime. This is part of the new regime. This is part of the new regime. And that language is the language of socialists and Nazis, the people on the extreme. That's not law. That's not governance. That's not representative politics. That is top-down, forced upon us ideology. And if you don't like it, get to the gulag.
Yeah, and Chris Minns has been proud to say we don't have the same free speech laws as the US. We don't have. He's like making a point. It's like a pride point for him. He's like, oh yeah, how good that we don't have free speech. And he literally said we don't have the same free speech laws because we're a multicultural nation.
Yeah,
which basically means because we've diluted our own culture and our national identity so much, we don't want other people in our country to get offended. So we have to suppress the natural population speech, which is exactly what's happened in the wake of the Bondi attack. I mean, 2 radical Indian Muslims come into our country. One was born here, which is sort of goes to my point of they're being born in these ethnic enclaves. They're not Australian by any means. They come into our country, and what they do is committed a horrendous attack on Australians, on Jews at an Australian landmark. It is by design. And then the government's response to that is to not mention the words radical Islam or just Islam at all. In any of their press
right-wing extremism.
It's right-wing extremism. And maybe like if you were less focused on locking up Joel Davis and Thomas Sewell, all of these people, you might have actually been able to stop this terrorist attack from happening. And you just wonder with all of this, I tell you what, the head of the AFP, that lady, God. I forget her name, she's made a fool of herself straight away.
She started really strong.
Yeah.
For like the first interview, and then since then it's just been a landslide.
She's talking about flying squads of hate disruptors. I mean, what does that even mean? Like the flying squad, a hate disruptor. I tell you what would disrupt the hate. You ready? Close the borders to radical Islam that is coming into our country. That would stop the hate.
Full stop, easy.
So all of these different things. So again, these things are committed not by Australians. They're committed on Australians, and then the response of the government is to take away the civil liberties of Australians. It's like, oh yeah, these 2 radical Muslims shot up a beach and it was a religiously motivated attack. That's the other thing. She's come out and said it's not religiously motivated.
Which is insane. Like, come on.
It's crazy. And they were saying that in the aftermath. They were saying, oh, we can't quite, put our finger on it right now. Everyone was able to see what had happened. It was very clear.
They say it's not religion, it's ethnic. Like that's insanity.
They bring it on. Again, we don't want this playing out in our country, which sort of goes to my point. It was not Christians shooting up other Christians. It was not our culture, our actual distinct culture imploding on itself. It is us as nice, kind people importing different cultures into our country and then those battles taking out on our shores. And we don't want that here.
We don't need that here. And that's why I was so always against, because I don't mind if you have an opinion on the Palestine conflict or the Gaza conflict. Why are you economically stifling the Australian population because you want to protest a conflict that is 1 million miles away on our bridge, in our streets? It's insane. What are you achieving? Like, honestly, like, if anything, they achieved, the Australian government, sending more weaponry and more tanks to Israel. Like, it just seems insane to me that the Australian government allows for a protest that is not for this country. The point of protest is to ensure your government does the right thing by its citizens, not for the citizens of a country that's 1 million miles away. And that's not to say trade's not good, right? And that's not to say that humanitarian aid where we're able to is not good, because that's an element of national charity. But we're talking about in an economic situation where we are in so much debt as a nation that we can only simply pay back the interest and none of the principal, that we are going to start giving money to faraway conflicts. Like, come on, that's insane.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. And we've done it. I mean, look at Iraq. We were involved there as well. Obviously, there's an element of we aren't strong enough in our sovereignty because we've handicapped ourselves because for some reason we don't want to use the God-given resources that we have in Australia. But so we're reliant on the US. I don't think it's a great thing that we're reliant on another country because they drag us into wars like Iraq. And our taxpayer dollars are funded to go over there, bomb the crap out of a country. And then where do these refugees go? They come back here. So we go over there, we fight their wars, and then they come back here. They change our national identity. They commit atrocities on our beaches. And then the government's response is not to close the borders. It is to take away our civil liberties. And there's no end to this cycle. It's just happened over and over the last 2 decades.
Where do you sit on the conspiracy theory that potentially the NSN is a left-wing plant so that they've got a bogeyman to point towards every time something bad happens in Australia?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too sure. I'm open to hear arguments about it. I think, again, like we were talking about, there's a very logical explanation as to why this radical reactionism exists, and I don't think they take that as a dig either. Like it is what it is. There's reasoning as to why this happens. The far left horrific abuse and perversion of all morality over the past 60 years is going to result in something like this. So I think there's more than reason enough in terms of the actual setup itself. I don't know enough
to believe that it's organic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's enough reason to believe it's organic. It's sort of like the Charlie Kirk shooting. Like there's enough reason. Sure, there is uncertainty around it. All these people have different conspiracies, but if you were just to look at the evidence, look at the facts, there's enough reason, there's enough motive right there for Tyler Robinson, someone who was really sympathetic to the trans cause, to go and kill someone who was outspoken on that issue. So I don't like the idea of working backwards from a conclusion. I don't like thinking, oh, it's the someone, or oh, it's this, it's that, or it's the left, or it's the right, or whatever it might be. It's sort of like deal with what's in front of you, test the motives. And I think there's more than enough reason for them to exist right now. And it's only going to grow as the government tries to clamp down on them existing. So
I agree. Yeah, and it's
careful what you wish
movement. That's exactly what I was about to say. Careful what you wish for, because these people do not understand how and this is, I linked this actually with the Bondi shooting. How did they get away with this? How did our intelligence agencies not pick this up? It's because they weren't speaking on the internet. They weren't speaking over messages. They lived together.
Yeah.
And so you're going to create isolated groups of people within small pockets who are going to become even more extreme because they are isolated together. If you start making speech illegal, any speech, I don't care if someone says globalize the intifada, I don't care if someone says Heil Hitler, any of that stuff, it gives me an idea of what is happening inside of your head. If I don't know what is happening inside of your head, how on earth am I meant to react appropriately or help you? It's just insane to me that they don't realize this. Like, we have therapists for a reason now these days, don't we? We're meant to speak about our problems. Isn't that the entire identity of the left wing? But you won't take that thought process on free speech, where it comes to understanding what's on the minds of your average citizen. And the one thing, and I'll lay my plane on this, the one thing that bugs me to hell, and I said this the other day, I said, if any politician ever makes a public statement on a social media app of any sort and they turn their comments off, they ought to be stripped of their role. You are a representative of the people, and you're not going to listen to the opinion of the people.
I hear some of them say, oh, we turn it off between office hours 9 and 5, and then they just sort of forget to turn it back on. But I couldn't agree more. I mean, there is no spirit of debate at all in politics, in Parliament. You look at the debates that happen now compared to 30 years ago, it's nothing. There is no debate. People can argue why it's got to that point, if it's the the media cycle now, how you sort of just have to have these short jabs to be like, oh, that was a good one, or whatever it might be. But there's no actual policy debate going on in our country. And immigration is the first meaningful policy debate that is taking place. And it's not because of the Liberals. They've still been very silent for the last two and a half weeks. They should be speaking out a lot firmer against Islamic immigration into our country, and mass immigration more broadly. But it's
somehow Susan Ley is talking about the USSR. Did you see that?
Yes, I saw that. I saw that earlier on, actually. That was hilarious. So if anyone hasn't seen that one, she was talking about how important it is that we send taxpayer dollars off to Ukraine.
Yeah, tanks, Abram tanks to Ukraine.
Yeah, of course. And she was talking about, we have to keep this illegal invasion by the USSR, the Soviet Union.
The Soviet Union.
And she corrected herself.
She corrected herself to the Soviet Union.
You can't make this stuff up. And I do think it does sort of lend itself to a bigger question, though. It is a generational thing. A lot of the time, this question about what our country will be going forward, it's being led by people who are 60 plus that aren't going to have a say in it, that don't necessarily have big they don't necessarily have big families or entrenched roots to the country. These are boomers that have basically greenlit a lot of our cultural and moral decay. And I don't want to make it a generational war, but it is true. It is true.
Does Albanese have kids?
I think he's got one. Yeah, one from his
I actually have no idea about
marriage.
That. Yeah, I actually have no idea about that because he just got married again, right? Like he
did. And I want to hear your view. I want to hear your view as a Catholic. So during the election campaign, Albanese really beat up his Catholic.
Yeah, his Catholicism.
Yeah. The Pope passed away. Obviously, he saw that. I was watching on and I was like, I hope this is genuine. Like, I hope this is actually a true conversion. Then he gets in and he doesn't swear on the Bible. He takes an oath of allegiance or whatever. Yes. So all of this sort of stuff. Where do you stand on Albanese and I suppose his faith in practice? Are you as cynical as me that
I'm super cynical.
Political thing? Yeah.
Super. It's all just political. It's all just I guess rubbing the genie bottle when you want to make a wish on the Catholic Church, because it makes it, and it's for the older generation more, because the older generation just wants to see the lip service a lot of the time. Like you were just saying, is that that voting block of people are so encapsulated by what they see on ABC News and what they see on just free-to-air TV, whereas the generation that's coming up are all entrenched in conversations like this, right, where they're seeing the clips pop up, and that's a two-way street because the government can't capture media anymore.
Yeah.
All that older generation is still captured. And so when Albanese does this sort of stuff where he goes to a Catholic church or he prays at a funeral, does the sign of the cross, the media covers it. When he doesn't swear on the Bible, the media doesn't touch it. So that's where you see it's all pandering politics. A real Catholic goes to war for his faith in the political arena, and does not wish-wash the ideology that he prescribes to in order to make himself. That is an Islamic idea. So that is the idea of taqiyya, which is effectively, in order to survive so that you can thrive later as a Muslim, you are allowed to lie about what your belief system is.
Wolf in sheep's clothing type thing, yeah.
Effectively say, I don't believe in Muhammad today, so that in 5 years' time, when my family is more powerful or I've got a bit more of an army, I can actually go and invade you. And it's the same idea with these people. You are putting on the image of a good and faithful servant, but in reality, you're a wolf in sheep's clothing every day of the week. I can't stand Anthony Albanese. I find him to be deplorable. And you were just bringing up the fact that there's no debate anymore in politics. I watch Question Time when it's on pretty regularly.
I pity you. I stopped doing that. I can't.
I put myself through it. I suffer so other people don't have to. So I can put clips up on my on my daily shows, and it is a nightmare. Yeah. All of these, not just Question Time, all of these Senate hearings and all of these, boards and committees and whatever, the amount of good questions that are asked and the amount of just horrendous answers. Just someone asks a good question that's really going to shake the boat, and it's just, you've insulted me, how dare you, you're racist, like typical liberal this, typical one nation that, you're a misogynist this, you're a misogynist that. It's no one's ever discussing what's actually happening in the country.
No,
and it's a shame.
Yeah, it's a shame. You're right. That seems to be where our politics is at. And you talk about Albanese and his faith, or clearly lack thereof, walking it out. That's sort of what young people are picking up on. We've grown up in this sort of fake shammy economy. We've grown up in this sort of, make-believe professionalism in the corporate world. We've grown up with our politicians pretending they're above board, but really the debate's nothing. And people look at, as someone who purports to be a Catholic, young Catholics, young Christians look at the Prime Minister who purports to be a Catholic, and they say, okay, well, why do you support gay marriage? Why do you support abortion? You're a sham. Like, it's sort of not even a matter of, I hope this is genuine or whatnot. I mean, obviously, I pray for his salvation, but goodness me, I mean, he is a force for evil. And if he's a regular church attender, I pray that his priest is able to have that conversation with him, because he is actively progressing the moral degradation of our country,
without a doubt.
Yeah,
and the thing is, it's not just Labor, and it's not just Labor these days. I for a long time when I was younger, I thought it was just Labor, but it's all politicians. It's all politicians at this stage. Pauline Hanson at this point has my vote. She's the only one who at least, even if I don't necessarily think she's Catholic or Christian, but at least she's maintained her vision and line the same way for 30 years. And it's keep the country that we were raised in. Yeah. The people who come in here have to accept that their way of life is not as good as our way of life, and that's why you're here.
Otherwise you wouldn't be here.
If you don't like it, go back. End of the day. If you want to make our country a third world hellhole, why don't you just go back to your own country? Unfortunately, making these sorts of little please do's is kind of essential. I enjoy doing it just for the fun of it, but at the same time, if you want to get a message out, you need the people in your community to just comment, like, subscribe, all of the normal jargon, right? Please just take a moment and give me a hand. We need to create a culture of commentary together. And I love the messages coming in my DMs. Put it in the comments section so that everyone else can see it too. Thank you. Don't bring your idea. If you're fleeing a place intentionally because, or not even if you're fleeing, right? Like my parents didn't flee Malta. Malta wasn't a hellhole. It wasn't a hellscape. But the opportunities that existed there only existed within Europe at the time, Greater Europe. They weren't part of the European Union yet, and so it was really hard to get in. We had a lot at the time as well. Now Malta is basically a corrupt stepping block. But if you're going to another country because you want to make your life better and the life of your children better, wouldn't you prescribe to every single value that was ingrained within that nation? And my biggest pet peeve of a human being that exists within Australian politics is Maureen Faruqi. I'm sure, everyone knows her. She walks into her and who's the other one?
Fatima Payne.
I cannot, those two, and that might be biased because they are both Muslim, but it just so happens that both of them also hate this country and continually say that every person in this nation who was born here is a racist just from birth, and that all Australians are racist from birth. And I just find those sorts of people who will come to this country, have these ideologies, and then sit there and crap on the rest of Australian society as though they are in some way, shape or form better, when the nations they came from and the ideologies they prescribe to are responsible for the majority of the evil in the world today.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think that sort of goes back to our conversation earlier about assimilation, and I think assimilation en masse is a bit of a myth. And I've spoken to people, again, church has got a lot of Brazilians. One of the elders is Brazilian who came out here about 7 years ago. He's a young guy, got his family, got a daughter, all of that sort of stuff. But he was talking about how it's a genuine, like it is a day-to-day conscious effort that you have to make to assimilate. It's not, it is a dying to a previous culture, which is easier for the Christian because you sort of have to die to your identity anyway,
Exactly.
as an individual. So all of that sort of thing, and that's what sort of goes to our point of, why Christianity is the bedrock, because it is that, orienting yourself to a higher purpose. Your identity is found in something greater.
And a shared vision.
Yeah, 100%. But that's not what's happening. And I don't think it is what's happened more broadly over the last 30 years. And that's why immigration in the past, even when it has been immigration and not settling, it has served our country's interest. And it's not doing that now, which is why it has to stop, in my opinion. And I don't think that there's evidence that assimilation on broad scale is happening.
No,
so it's sort of
not at all. They're creating pockets. They're creating pockets. And again, pockets always existed, right? Even like the Italians, where they congregate. The Serbians and the Croatians, where they congregate.
In Carlton.
Yeah, whereas for us, it's Greystanes is all the Maltese, for example, right? And the Italians used to all go to Greystanes, and they build their church, but their church is, then becomes a soccer club, and their soccer club it's all this meritocracies, right? Where you come in and the sporting elements that are created, the cultural elements that are created as a consequence aren't based around ideologies. They're based around cuisine. They're based like that sort of stuff. It's good. And people say, oh, you want their food, but you don't want, their faith and what they believe in. Yeah. That's exactly what we're saying. Like, we want your food. Like, I'm happy to have buttered chicken. I'm happy to have, Massaman curries and all this. I'm happy to have more options in terms of food. That makes my life better. Don't bring your ideas here that are the amount of garbage I now see strewn across the side of the road in Western Sydney. Never something I grew up with. Garbage bags dumped everywhere.
100%. But it
terrifies me.
The point is you can't separate it though. And I think that's my sort of point from earlier on. There is a small percentage, very small percentage of people that come here from different cultural backgrounds and then assimilate. There is a high correlation with them largely being Christian. So I agree with you to that extent. But it's just not what's happening on scale. And I think, I might be sacrilegious to Piers Morgan, but I would rather eat like the Germans are flying overhead and you're British and you're having your baked beans on toast. I would rather eat like that every day than have nice food in my country not be my country.
Well, I 100% agree with you in terms of the number. It's impossible because, and here's a correlated in my mind anyway, see where you land on this. I think it's a consequence of the fact that we don't have bullying anymore. Like, I know bullying sucks. I was bullied as a kid, but I think that there is an element of knowing that there's a bigger thing around you or a bigger person around you that will beat you into submission if you do not subscribe to the general rule. Like if you're a soccer player or a footy player and, as a soccer player, you decide that you want to play footy, and as a footy player, you decide that you want to play soccer within the game that you're currently playing, you break the rules of the system and you get kicked out. If you try and pick the ball up in soccer and run it through the field like a rugby player, the rules will pick you up and spit you out. That's how the country needs to be as well. If you decide to live your life as an Indian from the streets of Mumbai, where you chuck your stuff everywhere, that video I'm sure you saw where someone decided to pop a squat and take a crap in front of a tree, but that's what you did in India, then you ought to have the rules pick you up and spit you out. And that's a consequence of the fact that we're not willing to say that this is our rule. You didn't follow our rule. Get out. You're done. No strikes. You're done. Get out.
Yeah, I agree with the sentiment. I think it's not bullying. I'd say it's authority. I think in terms of the schoolyard, it's sort of like an authority power play for kids to bully each other to some extent. I think that's ultimately what it is. But I think more 100%. Broadly in society, you're right. The authority is ultimately, as we become less Christian, is the government. And then it's like, okay, well, what does the authority power have to say on all these things? And it's like, basically anything goes. Everyone, I think it's the final verse of Judges. Everyone was their own king. They saw fit what they did in their own eyes. That was it. And that's sort of where we're at right now. So I think you're right. There's a lack of authority. There's a lack of a strong masculine father figure in most households across the
Yes.
country.
And
And I think
how
that's
and
what's
he,
missing. Yeah. Which sort
finish
of goes
finish.
to childcare as well. I'm obviously very passionate about in the work that we do. We've got a lot of childcare facilitators as members. They love what they do. Most of them are in it for the right reason, 100%. But that doesn't change the reality, which is the childcare system is inherently anti-family. It does treat children like commodities. It throws women back into the workplace. Like you said, it's not really a choice of whether you want to be a stay-at-home mother anymore. It's sort of required because the economy requires it. And if you want to get a house loan, if you want to get a loan from the bank to own a house, dual income is going to help you out a hell of a lot more than single income. All of these sort of things. It's set up for the government to raise your children, for you to own nothing and be happy. That's what they
Yes.
say. And
What was his name? Who said that?
I don't know. Klaus Schwab. I think
Yeah,
it goes
Klaus Schwab.
with that.
UN.
But yeah, I think childcare is one of the clearest examples of the attack of the family. And I think it's only become, like, if you were to propose Australia's current childcare system to the nation that we were 60 years ago, where we are 85%.
They'd crucify you.
Yeah, we're saying, no way, what are you doing? Bugger off, essentially. And now it's like, it's sort of a given. It's like, what do you mean you're staying at home to care for your children? Are you barefoot in the kitchen, some widow? It's like, yeah, that's the whole sort of point. And that's what it comes to with homeschooling as well. No, ducking through a few different things here, but the education system is storied with all of this. And you touched on the tertiary stuff, the tertiary education problems. It happens so young. And with childcare and then with homeschooling, people are seeing what we spoke about in mainstream education, in private education, public. They maybe can't afford to fork out $40,000 a year private school fees, or even $10,000 a year for lots of kids. It's just not doable. So they're turning to homeschooling for the financial reason, but also the point of, I don't want my children growing up around this stuff. I don't want this horrific stuff being taught in schools. I also don't want them being exposed to kids who are being exposed to horrific things at such a young age. And talk about pornography. I mean, kids are watching porn as young as 6 years old. You don't see that on the social media ban. There's no ban on pornography sites at all.
No, there's no ban on it. So there is actually a small step which has been made so part of the policy that started on the 27th, where Google and search engines, if they think that you might be an under 16, it will actually blur out unintentional pornography. And so, like, if you're just doing a random search, it'll like, if you're doing a search for, beaches in Australia, it'll blur out that stuff through AI. But I'm on the same train as you in that it does not make sense to me that you're going to ban social media because of dangerous issues, but you're not going to ban pornography.
Yeah.
Or at least put an ID in place that automatically bans it anyway.
It's not an issue of unintentionality as well. Like, you're talking about young boys, young girls in some cases. It's sort of like, oh, what's this thing? Like, asking questions about stuff. They will look it up. Like, that's what happened. That's what happened with me as a young boy. It's what happened with my mates. Like, all of this stuff, it is so accessible, far more accessible now than it was when I was growing up. So this unintentional thing of stumbling across it isn't the main issue. Like, it's the fact that kids will naturally
actively look it up.
Yeah, and it's because they're having conversations with people at school that do, because their parents aren't necessarily found in a strong Christian household, and you're having all of this weird sexuality stuff being pushed in schools. So back to the point of homeschooling, you've got this massive influx in homeschooling in Victoria in particular, which is sort of the birthplace of a lot of these bad ideas. And from there, these homeschooling networks are being set up, and basically the opposition from the government is, well, we don't want much homeschooling. We don't want to incentivize homeschooling because it's important that kids integrate into society. And it's like, that's the whole point of why
we're trying to get out of society.
Yeah. That's the whole point. We don't want to be surrounded by this, which is really disheartening. And in my role, where we're overseeing, the majority of our members are in public secondary schools, public primary and secondary schools. it is so disheartening to see the level of disrespect being afforded to parents in those education settings, as well as in private schools, because it's essentially this, you'll get what you're given. What are you going to do, homeschool? Then your kids will be weird. That's essentially the argument. And people are saying, okay, well then let them be weird or whatever it is.
But the
it's
thing
like
is
the
communities. So we are part of a homeschooling community. My daughter goes to regular school, the same set of schools that I was speaking about earlier, which is the ones that I'm alumni from. But we are part of a homeschooling community for our younger children as well. Just because it gives us an extra year or so, because there's no time limit on when you do it. And regular schooling as a system works well for my eldest daughter, but it might not work well for my second daughter. So we're keeping our options open in that respect. And the communities are awesome. They're well organized. They have a real vision on how to actually educate the children, and it's just run by mums. Like, it's all run by mums, and because the dads are so involved in it as well, the boys' side of the education I find is so much better. As a consequence of that. Now, I don't believe in mixed education. I think that there needs to be education for boys and there needs to be education for girls. I grew up in an all boys school, and my daughter will go into a single stream as well, because men need to learn, and this is what the difference is going to be in the future. Men need to learn from men. At an early age during the daycare era, women are required as a consequence of the fact that they want a safe option. But then when dad enters the picture, when 5 and 6 and 7 turns up as an age bracket, that's where you're really going out and doing all the dangerous stuff. As a kid, you're climbing the highest possible tree, and if mum's going to be scared of that, then that kid's never going to be able to explore that element of the world, and that's what we've been told is not good anymore by the government in the schooling system. How many male teachers exist in public schools?
It's I know in the ACT we were looking at this recently. It was like, I think 79% of primary teachers are females, which is sort of that age bracket that you're talking about. Like, it is a big issue, and I think you're right. Young boys need to learn from men. But it's also just this idea of this one-size-fits-all education, and this idea that boys and girls aren't different. They're the same, and the same learning technique, the same teaching techniques, all of this will work, which is just not true. And that's why you've got so many of these alternative schools coming up. And we sort of touched on the ideological side of why the mainstream education system needs massive reform. But also look at the output of results. Student results are plummeting. The school day is not efficient whatsoever. It's basically becoming an element of glorified daycare, which it shouldn't be, which teaching as a profession never has been, because we just want to be able to chuck both parents into the workforce.
Yes, that's exactly right.
All of these different things are leading to a worse system in terms of the culture. It's leading to a worse system in terms of student results. The way that people interact with one another as well isn't necessarily any better. And then you look at the childcare sort of thing, and it's like, okay, why are autism rates so high? Why is there such an inability to socially integrate, just as like general human beings being able to talk to one another? Why is there this weird, this sharp rise in being antisocial as kids? And it's like, well, maybe ripping children away from their mother so they can get back into the workforce is a big part of that. And I think it is. And all the studies show that children benefit from being with their mother for the first few years, in particular in the developmental stage. But the mainstream education has not been set up to serve students whatsoever. It's been set up to serve the government. It's been set up to serve big corporations like the Victorian Catholic Education Authority. It's not serving teachers particularly well, and they're being sort of used and abused to facilitate this. And I think a lot of them, many of which are our members, are sort of sick of it. And they're saying this isn't what the teaching profession should be. We should be educating. We should be able to implement our own thoughts into what is the best way to guide this child in how to think, not necessarily what to think. So there are a multitude of problems with mainstream education. And again, there's no signs of it recovering. What we advocate for at the TPAA is systemic change. So the answer to all of these issues is obviously breaking the back of the problem in the first place, which we believe is a centralized system. So having basically all teachers and principals answerable to a state/federal Department of Education, having all of these, this hard to interpret curriculum, all of this different stuff, basically having education not just administered but poorly run by the state is not working. And what we need to do is decentralize it, have something similar to a charter school system where you've got funding following the child as opposed to going directly to schools and being inefficient.
I love that.
All of this sort of stuff. So what it does as well, in terms of the setup of what that would look like, it would look like a principal accountable to a local board of even numbered parents, even numbered teachers, and then the principal being able to make decisions on balance about what the teachers, his employees, are trying to achieve, and the parents having a direct say at the table as well. And the best part of it is if the parents don't like the way that the school is being run, they leave and the funding follows them. So the school loses funding. So all of these different things, the incentives are all wrong at the moment. The incentive at the moment is for it to be inefficient, for results to continue to plummet, so that the union, the Australian Education Union, can go to the government and say, hey, we need more funding. And that's what it becomes. It becomes a funding debate.
And that's the circular logic of big government, right? Is that big government will funnel money into public education. That public education will funnel people who are good at specific roles, which is effectively HR and the government jobs that they require to keep their fake economy running. And then and that's one of the things people don't get. Every government job that is created, which is the majority of jobs today, something like 80% of new jobs are government jobs that are created in Australia today.
NDIS has a lot to say about that.
Massive, heaps. I have to speak to my friend Emeka about it and see where he lands on it. All of that money is paid for by taxes that come from where? Because then your pay is also taxed, which has already come to you as tax. And so what is this economy actually based on? It's all just circular money that is traveling around, funneled from the government to the education system. And then the education system, propped up entirely by the government, is somehow meant to teach people anything other than and again, we were talking about incentives, right? The government incentivizes the public schools to teach people about the ideology. And I'm talking about the Labor government because Labor always funds public education and Liberals tend to not fund private education, but reduce the funding to public services and deal with general economic growth and everyone else, all ships rise with a high tide, basically. And so the Labor government is incentivized to pay for these schools because then these schools will funnel kids into their voting platform. And once they're voted into their platform, then they get more money coming through the public system and it keeps going around like that. And the way that you explain it specifically with a school board means that they are then accountable to something other than the government, which is the actual parents who want to see the best for their children, not what's best for the government. And I love that idea.
100%. And the flip side of that is, firstly, you need parents at the table. They are the primary stakeholder in their child's education. Okay, they're the ones that should be raising their child. But with teachers as well, there's a lot of reform that has to be done in teacher training because these teachers are coming out of useless 3.5, 4-year degrees a lot of the time, where 80% of the topic is not learning about the actual craft of teaching itself or basic content of English, maths, whatever it might be. But it's learning about these these weird new education techniques, about student-led learning, about whatever social, cultural policies as well that universities and the government are pushing. So these teachers are coming in very underprepared. But what it used to be was the teaching profession is a noble profession when it is done right. It is genuinely leading the education of the youngest generation. There is nothing, I don't think, more noble and important in a society than that role when it's actually empowered. And it's not at the moment. And people like to have a crack at teachers because they're saying, all it is, you get all these holidays a year and it's glorified babysitting. And it's like, that's not what they want. Like teachers don't want to have this useless, limp-wristed impact because they're being inhibited by the government. They do it for a reason. They care about the next generation. And they genuinely want to help shape that. And When you've got well-trained teachers that are good at their craft, that have learnt that because, instead of being in the university classroom learning all these rubbish theories, they're getting some paid placement done, helping resolve the teacher shortage crisis as well. Then they're coming in far more prepared and far more able to actually teach well, and they're getting better quicker, which means students are getting a better.
So you offer these as a service as well under
Well, we
Red
have
Union?
professional development, which helps a lot. We offer that through our CPD provider, but through Teacher Academy. But what we are advocating for is the systemic reform of changing these education degrees from this 2-year, this 4-year theory type thing to basically, and like 6 weeks paid placement they do. I'm not even sure if it's paid. I don't think it is. Basically to a 2 years paid placement, 1 year theory thing. Because any teacher will tell you as soon as you're in the classroom, it's a completely different ball game to what you're being taught.
Every job.
Yeah,
like
100%.
every job.
And it's different as a parent as well, I can imagine. Like you can have all the best intentions and theories, which I do as an aspiring parent, and then you get to actually being a parent and it's like, oh goodness, that was all very different.
All the same. It doesn't matter what book you read, every kid's different. And not just your kids, but every kid that you also have is different. And so whatever you learn from kid 1, make sure you throw it out the window for kid 2. And the more I think about that, the more I struggle with the idea of standardized education, because just thinking about how I had to jump hurdles in my own brain to change the way I taught my second daughter from my first daughter, and then from my second daughter to my son. The idea that one person can teach a class of 20 to 30 students a subject and pinpoint each person's ability to learn is outrageous to me.
Yeah.
It's outrageous. Now, your kid, God willing, might actually be better served by a school that is a standard approach to education because they are purely intellectual beings. So my eldest daughter is a very intellectual human being. She thrives on authority and structure. She fits into a schooling environment under the current standardized structure. I don't know if my second daughter will. She's an airy-fairy, loves animals. So how on earth can we expect our teachers, one, to be, and again, teachers in Australia aren't paid badly. Teachers in Australia are paid pretty well. But then being forced to teach these kids ideologies that they don't believe in and simultaneously have to do it in a way that does not purport to the actual child's best development. How does that work? And how many of these issues do you see day to day from, I guess, your members?
Yeah, well, that's the point. It doesn't. And I think it's made even more difficult by the fact that there are so many, that there's such a push for inclusion in particular. So basically abolishing special schools as well. When we've got this huge influx in children with learning difficulties, sometimes severe disabilities that genuinely need that, there's this rampant push for inclusion, which basically pushes these kids who need extra attention, who might only thrive in a classroom of 5 people because they can have that teacher attention regularly, put them into a classroom of 30 people, they don't get the attention, the resources they require, and they become an absolute drain on the other 29 students. And we've got classes, we did a survey of this at the start of last year. We've got classes, I think it was up to 10 students with severe learning difficulties in a class of 30, and there's one teacher and maybe a teacher aide if you're lucky. So all of this different stuff, there's not much, it is very much a copy and paste, standardized approach, which is the thing that you wouldn't get at a local level where parents and teachers are actually talking about this, debating this, and the principals are actually able to make different determinations on that. And the point is there would be more money at the source and at the root of where it's required than where there is at the moment. Just as an example, in Victoria, there are for every teacher, for every 4 teachers, let me get this right. For every 10 teachers, there's 4.7 administrators. So 4.7 bureaucrats. Wow. Yeah. In a healthy system, it's 10 to 1. So they've got over 4 times that.
40% of the workforce almost is 30 to 35% of the workforce is administrators.
Yeah, and not even local level administrators necessarily. Like these are bureaucrats doing lesson planning, doing, respectful relations policy, all of this stuff, implementing government
Oh,
directives
God.
in head office in Brisbane. Worst part is they're getting paid more than the frontline teachers. They're the cushy
Oh,
jobs. So if you were to just restructure it, so across Australia, it was 10 to 1 instead of, I think the average is 10 to 2.5. Victoria is a uniquely bad thing. You would save over $10 billion a year in education funding. In Victoria alone, it is over $3 billion in every single year just through the sheer level of inefficiency in the government bureaucracy.
how do they get away with this stuff? Is it just slow build? Is it direct policy? Like, how did this happen?
I think it's slow build. Obviously, it's a funding thing as well. I mean, the majority of people that take these department jobs are sometimes registered teachers that just want to get paid more, like a bit of a logical thing, incentive for them. But it's also you're shaping the minds of the students without the actual responsibility of teaching them. So you get a lot of these socially progressive people going in and taking up these things. They join the left-wing union. And the union gets more money because they're getting higher fees because these people are on more money and they tie their money to percentage basis. So the union's winning. The government's winning because they can say education has never been better funded. We've put more money into education. That's what it always is. And the ones that lose,
it's all going to the wrong places.
Yeah, and the ones that lose are the actual frontline teachers because their conditions are worsening because of things like the inclusion push, the mixed bag that is the curriculum, trying to sort out how to implement that into the classroom. And it's the parents. And of course, it's the students who are actually not
suffer,
benefiting from their education. So
can you name and shame? Can you name and shame the worst unions?
Australian Education Union. So that's the primary one. They're called the Australian Education Union in Victoria and I think the Northern Territory and South Australia. They're called the Queensland Teachers Union in Queensland. That's the Queensland branch. New South Wales Teachers Federation is what they're called there. And I think in every other state, it's basically called the AU. In WA, it's the SSTWU, I believe. So that's sort of where we're at. Again, it benefits the union, it benefits the government. And the frustrating thing is when a Liberal government gets in, a conservative right-wing government, they don't do anything because they're scared. They're scared of this funding. They're scared of, but if I do this, then the union is going to run really hard in my electorate. So it all comes back to incentive. The incentive is there for there to be so much waste in education. So that will continue to happen until the system is changed.
How on earth does this stop?
It's got to be.
What's your vision?
Well, there's not going to be a politician riding in on a white horse actually making this happen, and they won't get elected if they run on it because it'll be, you're talking about cuts to the bureaucracy, which is what's required. You're talking about this, talking about that.
Frame it as less outcomes for children.
100%. So it's got to be led by the public. We're not going to be led by our leaders, which is sort of the state of Australian politics. It has to we have to make it politically convenient for basically the right-wing side of politics to enact this reform. The left won't do it. Labor will never do it because doing this threatens their very funding through the union movement. It threatens the amount of control that unions can have on politics, and that is not ever going to be a saleable thing. So it's not a left-right issue, other than the fact that the left wing in this country, the Labor Party, is directly incentivized by education being inefficient. So it has to be a politically convenient thing for the future conservative government to actually run on. And I still think we're a far way away from that. I think a lot of people respond well to our existence as an alternative union, our proposed reforms, but I think it's going to have to get far worse before it gets better. And that's sort of the cynic in me.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, I think I think it has to genuinely become a crisis. Like in Queensland at the end of 2024, or October 2024, when there was the state election, education is a state issue. It was not spoken about by either side. Like the left don't want to touch it. Labor don't want to touch it because it's working for them politically. The right don't want to touch it because they're scared that if they do, it'll bite back. So that's sort of where we're at. It is quite disheartening.
No, I'm hopeful. I think we're at the beginning of the next 5 to 10 years of struggle.
Yep.
And we're going to end up now in a situation where I think Pauline will be the first. I think Pauline will make a dent in the next elections. But I think that there'll be more of a groundswell movement. And the voices that are coming up now, we've all just got to link up together, I think, and just start to create a culture of conversation around these topics so that people aren't just getting fed the sources that they get for free online from the mainstream media. In light of that, where can people find you? We've been on for 2 hours and 20 minutes. My kids just came home and I'm expecting them to break through the door any second. Where can people find you? What are your best socials? And if they want to get involved with Red Union, where do they need to go?
So just redunion.com.au, you can look at all the alternative unions we've got. And if you sign up to any of them, might pop this in the bio and stuff that we share with code Schuller. So just my last name, you get $100 off membership. But yeah, I'm on Facebook, Instagram, X and YouTube as well. Basically just Edward Schuller. I hope to have a chat as well. If anyone watches this and is interested, shoot me a DM, give us a call at Red Union and be happy to have a further chat. But thanks for having me on, Mark. It's been great.
No, you've been awesome. We'll do it again. I reckon we do a debate. On just a specific one, an hour. We'll set it up like a formal one on Australian national identity. I think that was a fun part of the conversation, and we can dig into that a bit more.
100%. Awesome.
Legend. Thanks for coming.
Cheers, mate. Appreciate it.